Years prior to Pearl Harbor, Japanese Americans were appropriately characterized as good Americans, born and educated as such, by the Los Angeles Times. Emergency. The United States was put into a state of emergency with the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Due to 6 months of crushing Japanese victories in the Pacific, poor race relations, and the fear of the Japanese invading the West Coast, a great hysteria swept the states. Man could no longer trust his fellow man. Americans began to suspect their Japanese neighbors of being spies. 2/3 of the Japanese in the West Coast were born in the United States and lived as peaceful citizens, farmers, shopkeepers. Perhaps most of these Japanese citizens were interned due to racism more than anything else, as those who were 1/16 Japanese and orphans who were even partly Japanese were amongst the interned. In order to protect the United States, drastic measures were taken. The Japanese were presumed guilty until proven innocent. As a direct result, Franklin D. Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066 of February 19, 1942. This authorized the relocation and internment of anyone who might threaten the U.S. war effort. This meant that all Japanese living in the West Coast were to be moved and put into camps. The government provided some aid to the Japanese in the process of selling off lands and items as fast as possible. Yet sacrifices still had to be made. Most of the time, the prices had to be set unfairly low to attract a buyer fast enough. Poor living conditions for a poor price. The military personnel surrounding each internment camp provided a watchful eye, stripping all occupants of privacy within their cramped living conditions. Additionally, all bathrooms were public, and people had to eat in public mess halls. Perhaps one of the few comforts could be found in the food, which was made to suit the tastes of the Issei and Nisei, native Japanese and Japanese born in the U.S. The Japanese tried to make their living conditions more comfortable as well, by putting up dividers in their living areas for privacy and furnishing their homes. After a few years of internment, interned Japanese were able to work on farms. Despite having to farm in a desert area, they were quite successful because of their irrigation techniques. Food was not sold, it was distributed amongst the internment camps. Similar to the actions of the U.S., Canada would intern its Japanese citizens as well in 1942. The homes and lands of those interned would be sold to pay off for the internment of the Japanese. Japanese had always been regarded as undesirables by Canada as well, with the barring of the Japanese from laboring in mines, working on government-funded projects, and voting. So it isn't surprising that they were going to be interned after Japan bombed Canadian troops stationed at Hong Kong and Pearl Harbor. Internment in Japan would last longer than in the US, stretching until 4 years after the end of World War II, 1949. Furthermore, all Japanese property was liquidated under the government's protective custody, with any and all forms of personal property and businesses ownership being sold, with the profit earned being used to pay down social assistance. Internment would first be questioned in 1980, with the Japanese-American Citizens League pressuring Jimmy Carter into appointing the Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians to launch an investigation on the camps. The CWRIC concluded that there was insignificant Japanese disloyalty at the time, and that internment most likely occurred because of racism. The CWRIC's recommendation of paying reparations would be taken up by Ronald Reagan in 1988 with the signing of the Civil Liberties Act. Not only was it an apology for internment, it paid reparations of $20,000 to 82,219 interred Japanese citizens and their ancestors, mounting up to a total of $1.6 billion.